Hi, John.
Hey, Scott, how are you today?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Always excited to be around you.
Oh, don't lie now. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We are here for our monthly digital experience workshop. We're talking all things B2B e-commerce in this workshop. We've now kind of taken the monthly cadence that we had for all things digital experience, and we've duplicated the cadence and the routine. And so on alternating weeks, we talk just about B2B e-commerce. And John, I'll let you introduce yourself in a minute, but I've got a new guest in the studio with me here today because of his fabulous expertise talking about all things B2B e-commerce. So thanks again, John. Let me get into the deck here quickly. This is, as I said, part of an ongoing series. So follow us on LinkedIn, and we do all kinds of very tactical things. If you watched the whole series by the end of the year, you'd know everything you could possibly want to know about elevating digital experiences and making B2B e-commerce shine. We're going to talk today about data mastery, creating value and driving growth. I won't bother explaining that any further because that's what the entire presentation is going to be about. And so now I'll stop talking and give you a chance to introduce yourself and say hello, John. What's your background and what would you like to share with us today?
Absolutely, Scott. So I spent the last 30 plus years in distribution and manufacturing, working at a number of really large organizations, focusing in on how do you leverage the intersection of business process as well as intelligent design and technology to create significant value for organizations. And at the center of all of that is always around how you actually leverage the data that you have, the data that you've acquired, and the data that you enrich in order to create rich value for your organization as well as for the customers and employees and suppliers that you operate with.
All the more reason why it's a good thing to have you in this room. So thanks again for joining us today. Please, everybody, follow us on LinkedIn and you won't miss a beat. Reach out if there's anything that either of us can do to advance your digital experience in your B2B e-commerce situation. We always start these workshops with a tool that we have built that we want to share. So go to flyw.co/B2B-data and you will get this worksheet. This is our template that we're going to be using today. There's a few reminders on the first tab to tell you how to go through the exercise. The overview tab is where we're kind of summarizing the gaps in the understanding the assessment itself. The first row here is driven from the third sheet, which is broken down by every single category that's in your product catalog. And this is where we're helping you just organize the data around how complete your data information actually is. We're going to come back to this tool, but go grab it so you can follow along and sort of play with that as we keep talking. All right, so context. Why is this even important? I found a few stats and data points that I'll sprinkle into the deck here today. This one stood out to me from McKinsey. On average, in this survey that they did, companies lose an average of 43 hours per employee, not per company, per employee, due to the stress around information, data, and technology issues. So they're not necessarily saying that the data itself causes a problem, but they're saying the people managing their jobs, interacting with the data, it just drops their productivity. Fairly accurate number by your assessment too, John?
Yeah, it's staggering to think about, but that's equivalent to an entire person week per person that you're actually losing. So 2% of your organization's productivity is actually spent dealing with issues around data. And that in the world that we operate in, it seems like every employee touches data in order to create the appropriate experience. And so this does resonate with me.
Yeah, it's an interesting stat. So even if you are not sort of a representative of that 43 hours, I can guarantee you some of these same situations are in your ecosystem. So we want you to think about this because John and I talked before this presentation, and we both believe that good data is a competitive advantage. Would you say that you get a little resistance to that concept, or are people pretty on board with that possibility, John?
I don't think that people come to that conclusion on their own, but as we talk through it, I definitely think that it And all I have to do is describe some of the example projects that I've been on that work on data just within the last year. So, we think about like all the different ways that people are contacting us in order to to improve their business. They want to implement a new e-commerce platform. They want to actually through and do search optimization, or they want to improve faceted navigation. They want to upsell, cross sell, right? Everything that they want to do always comes back to data. And data can be a strategic asset if you think about it that way, but you've got to go all the way through, the life cycle of the data, and like how you acquire it, how you normalize it, how you enrich it, and then also how you syndicate it to the systems that need to leverage that in order to be able to create this competitive advantage.
Well, there you go. Workshop over. Love it. I mean, I think a lot has been said there. I think all of those things requires good, thoughtful deployment of those experiences, but it would be a total waste of any energy to do that if you have bad data. So it's definitely an important component. It's a fundamental component. So speaking of which, sort of let's look at the sort of first principles of what we're talking about when we're talking about data. There are many data domains in every business, and there's a maturity matrix across each one of those. You need to think about your product data, your customer data, even the order data that comes in. And from a marketing perspective, what kind of engagement are you getting? There's different data sources there. And we at the moment just want you to think about those data sets at a high level. Are they at risk? Is there a chance to improve them? Or is that something you've already got sort of well in hand and you're excelling at that? So think about these different data domains and the maturity that you've got in each one. Pick the one where you're going to find some, where you're having some pain point, where you see some opportunity. We are proposing that there are some criteria you can use. And if you Google this, you'll get all kinds of criteria. This is what's in our tool. So we'll come back to what these things mean in a moment. But to us, these are some good criteria for what good data looks like. You'll also hear some systems mentioned when you think about data. And John, I was on a call earlier today where they were thinking that the system and the technology choice was fundamental to their success. Now, it's important. But what would you say when you're thinking about these platforms?
I love that, because while any of these systems individually can create value, I think too often organizations look to the system as the strategy. And so what I would say is that when organizations recognize that managing your data to create value for your business and your customers, that's the strategy, these become tools that assist you in doing that. So let's make sure that we focus in on the people and the processes as well as the technology when we're looking at how to author good data.
Yeah, well said. And I'll just add, if you're missing some of these systems, that's not a bad thing. That we're just saying, like, listen, you're gonna run into these acronyms. We want you to be familiar with them. For what we're talking about today, in the case of this workshop, we're just going to kind of narrow our focus and for the sake of simplicity, but the concept, the approach of evaluating data and mastering your data will be the same no matter what kind of data and which system you'll find it in. So we're looking at this from a product information lens, and those systems are often called PIMs. More recently, they're called PXMs because if we didn't change the acronym anymore, you and I would be out of a job. So we're looking at product data for the case of our conversation today. Looking at some of the gaps and pitfalls that come up along the way, another stat to put in front of you here. This was a real scenario that I found an article about from IBM that talked about a company, they're mentioned here, Unity, who had to write down $110 million and found a 37% stock price drop because they ingested bad data. What a real, cautionary tale. I mean, it's an extreme one, but not terribly foreign, eh, John?
No, not at all. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that not all pitfalls result in public shaming as well as loss of real wealth like is had here. It could simply mean that because you don't focus in on your data, that platform that you just acquired, now you're going to have to pause the implementation on it and spend a significant amount of time getting the data models right and getting them consistent so that you can then continue with the project. So in fact, I've seen that when an organization tries to leverage technology to solve the problem without thinking about the data, they increase the length of the project by roughly 75%, having to address the process and governance issues that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, like a lot of times it's just that efficiency loss is so dramatic. I'm bringing up the next slide, which is a few of those common pitfalls that we workshopped getting ready for this conversation. Which one of those do you think, because they're not in priority order here, they're just in sort of stream of consciousness on this slide, which one jumps out to you? Do you think is probably one you bump into more than anything else? Is there one?
I think every one of them is applicable to the situation, but the one that really sticks out to me,
I want you to pick one. Come on.
Yeah, number 5. It's the lack of governance, as well as having the processes defined for how you're going to acquire the data, how you're going to normalize it, how you're going to enrich it, and really how you're going to leverage it to drive that value, as I talked about earlier. So governance is the number one thing that's consistently missing, and it influences all the other 7.
I love it. If I'm going to pick one that's it's different, just because you already went with governance, I'm going to say inconsistent taxonomy. I think it's kind of like hidden under the radar. It's like and just to make sure we are all understanding what we mean by that, it's the way that you're categorizing and organizing your data into product groups, you're able to search it by criteria and different facets of the data catalog. So I think a lot of times we just kind of treat that as an afterthought. So being really intentional about that, or it's the place where the least amount of housekeeping takes place, and then it just becomes a dog's breakfast of product data.
Absolutely. And like I said, I tried to opt out by saying, hey, they're all equally important, but you maybe pick one. But that's a fun one, because if you think about it, right, is that master data or is that reference data? Actually, does it even matter? I don't think it matters. You need to make sure that you understand how your customers want to be able to look at products. And then how do you make sure that taxonomy contributes to their ability to discover those items? That's a critical element, especially from an e-commerce perspective.
I mean, it helps drive user experience and the accessibility of the information as well. So it's pretty critical. All right. So I also love showing this next slide when we're talking about any of this. This is the customer journey, and it's one that we're all hopefully familiar with. It's moving along that spectrum from being a stranger to being an advocate of the business that I interact with, that I work with. And it is the entire customer journey, from the point at which they have no familiarity with who you are and what you do, to becoming a loyal advocate and an extension of your brand, because you've been able to embrace each other and become good, solid partners. If you're not keeping the frame of reference against this entire journey when you're thinking about data mastery, you're missing opportunities. And I'm going to say the same thing goes, the same perspective on that internal operations. Your client for the data is both your systems internally and the teams that need to interact with that data. And this goes all the way from that source of the data, the ID department, the database, to the executive team that needs to understand whether or not we've got those high level metrics running properly. So often, John, I know you would echo this. We start a project, we get hired by IT operations, sometimes finance, and that's where the focus stays.
Absolutely.
So I think looking at how,
I was going
to jump in there with something, or?
It's the intersection there between the operational efficiency as well as the customer journey that is really where we need to be thinking about, because when we do this right, we will actually make the customer journey more effective, not just for us, but also for our customer. But we'll actually make the rest of the organization more efficient, because we've taken the time to make sure that the data that is going to be consumed by all these systems is in the appropriate state for what it is that they need, and recognizing those can be different, but they all need to be thought about.
So my ask to everybody listening, watching, thinking about all this is, when you're trying to unlock more value from your data, put these 2 diagrams or ones like it on the board, make sure they represent your organization, and ask yourself, have I thought about how my data is unlocking opportunity in every single one of these buckets, again, or the ones that are appropriate to you? When you do this right, you can get above market growth. Final stat I think I have in the deck is from McKinsey. Companies that are using data-driven B2B sales growth engines report 15 to 25% growth above market. I think it's an obvious stat. I think everybody's like, yeah, okay, thanks. But I think it's worth sharing and saying this has real, measurable, impactful value.
And use that to create the return on investment that you're going to make, and focusing in on, like I said, the processes, the people, the technology that are going to add value to that.
Yeah. So some of the other opportunities specifically, I want to make sure we're thinking about not just sort of the efficiency and the operation, but it's going to touch all aspects of the business. We just talked about journey. I'll ask you to react to this slide the same as the pitfalls one. John, where do you think some of the best opportunity is from this list?
Depending on where a company is in their maturity, I could say that it's going to be on search, but the one that I'm going to focus on right now is going to be on personalization. The ability to create personalized experiences, not just online, but in every channel that a customer interacts with you, can be driven by the capabilities of understanding the data and understanding how that contributes to the understanding that you create of that data as the products and the customers, and then to be able to provide them unique experiences based on that. What about you?
Well, couldn't have said it better. And I'll be the one to take the diplomatic answer here, because I'm going to just reiterate what you said about this is one thing that I think is a little bit more unique to the individual customer that's in the situation. And I think there's a bit more nuance towards what they're trying to do. I love the fact that it unlocks more of this personalization and account specific engagements that you can get. I'm always thinking about sort of the front end and the experience.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the tool in the time we have remaining here. So go back and grab that spreadsheet that we shared, and we'll pop the link up again in a few minutes. We want you to look at this as not the recipe, but as inspiration, okay? We want you to take that document and what we've been telling you here, and we want you to think about the criteria that we've put forward here. We gave a few, we just talked about them. We're going to go into them in more depth here, but we also want you to then start with the completeness exercise. Don't have to, but it's an easy place to start. You can actually measure for completeness. Then go into some of the more qualitative, subjective assessments. There are ways to be more scientific about it. You can hire John or I to help you with that. Do your evaluation, discuss internally, and then use that to inform your action plan. By taking this sort of systematic approach, you're going to be actioning the most impactful steps as opposed to the ones that hurt the most. And you might think that those two things are the same, but they're not. I'm always telling the team here, don't confuse emotion for urgency. Just because something feels difficult does not mean it's going to be the first thing that you should be focusing on. So that's how we go through it. Let's look at that criteria that we are going to use for measuring, that we're going to use today for accomplishing data mastery: completeness, consistency, accuracy, usability, governance. There are others. Google it if you want more, but I think this is a solid set. So let's look at what they mean. John, do you want to tell us a little bit about the completeness exercise?
Absolutely. So at its most basic level, we're looking to understand is, what percentage of your SKUs, of your products you have online, have all the required fields that you actually need. So it's as simple as saying, hey, if we've got 18 fields for every single product, how many of those are complete? And we're gonna get into things around accuracy and is it usable? But this is a way just to look and say, across all your data and exist in your database, right, count how many fields you have and how many you don't, and that'll give you an understanding of what completeness looks like.
So I will quickly peek back over at the worksheet that we were providing, because we just said do it for every single product, and we mean it, but it's okay to do subtotals by product category, just to help you understand, is there a specific area that needs more attention than another? In example that we've mocked up in the data, you can see sort of the electrical product listing appears not to be as complete and comprehensive as the plumbing one. We've probably got better partnerships on the plumbing line than we do on the electrical line to give ourselves a more complete information. But we want you to literally count the fields and then come up with a score for yourself. But that's different than saying it's good data that's in there. That's just saying, is there data? So we're now going to talk about a couple of other criteria that go to whether or not it is got any value. Consistency. What do we mean by consistency, John?
Yeah, I think we put 5 examples up here, Scott, just to be able to show that when you're looking within a product category, does it represent what it is that your customers are going to be expecting as they're going from product to product, as an example. So if you're in the electrical distribution space and you're actually looking at a receptacle, as a customer's flipping through, are they all named the same, right? Are you able to see the dimensions of the product and be able to compare that across? They actually have full descriptions? Do they have the same number of images, or do you have some products from certain suppliers that have 7 images and others only have 1 or 2? You're going to create bias in your customers by having information that is inconsistent across within a product line and then across product lines. And that's really important, especially if you are actually representing multiple product lines. You're going to want to make sure that your customers understand that all of them are important and they can come to you for every single one of them, not just a really robust product category and then a bunch of also-rans.
I'm going to add for emphasis I'm just going to reiterate for emphasis what you just said. You are going to create a bias in the mind of your buyer if you don't have consistent data. You might have way better, and we're using a distributor example here, but I think if you're a manufacturer and you got different product lines or unique products, the same thing goes, right? If you have an awesome product, but the delivery of the information is substandard, it's subpar to the rest of your catalog, you're just going to leave somebody feeling like it's not as high quality the product itself. So the data that you deliver and the experience with which you deliver it adds to that brand value and capacity to sell. Accuracy. I think we all know what it means to have accurate data, but what goes into evaluating accuracy as one of these health criteria?
Yeah. So when you think about accuracy, the first thing that we want to say is it right? Well, we have to think about it based on the customer's understanding of kind of what that source of truth is, especially as a customer is going from, in a shopping experience, going from site to site and actually looking at information, right? So you need to understand everything, looking at where you're getting the data from, right? Does it tie back there? Do you have someone who's referencing that and auditing it to make sure that it's right? So we like to talk, especially with the advent of generative AI. We like to say, oh, well, we'll leverage AI in order to audit it. Do you actually have a human in the loop that is actually validating that information and making sure that it's right for your purpose and your context, right? And then I think the other thing that's just listed in the bottom too is, do you have mechanisms in place in order to gather feedback, right? Are you getting feedback from your customers? Are you getting feedback internally from your stakeholders? And then do you have accountability to make sure that feedback is reviewed and actionable? I think that's a really critical element of the accuracy piece of it.
So I just want to emphasize here, I think we all know what accuracy means, and we can say, well, yeah, I mean, my data is correct or it's not correct, but there's a bit more of a spectrum here, and there's more activity you need to think about that goes into confirming you have accurate data. And it is these things that we've just touched on. It's very easy for accuracy to creep in undetected. So some of those feedback elements help you cover for that. Usability. Another critical thing. I could go on and on about this forever. So just to kind of kick off this particular category, your data has to follow brand standards. If you don't have brand standards, you need to build some. You don't need to go on a whole branding exercise, but put down, at least for yourself, some notes about what it means to deliver good data from a brand, a communications experience, a customer, a partner perspective. Can you deliver the quality of the front end user experience that you are trying to create, that is that is an extension of who you are and what you've done. I want to really emphasize the B2B use case when you're thinking about usability. We're not just talking about having a good product catalog that's got all the right usability features and user experience. In the B2B world in particular, you need to think about things like data syndication, the partnership channel. Are other people clients of your data that need to republish it or repackage it in other ways? And how can you make sure that that is enabled as part of your user experience? Measure it against that entire, we're going to keep coming back to this entire customer journey, operations journey. And I think here we're talking more and more so about AI readiness. And there's a lot of confusion and anxiety. What do you mean? Oh my God, how do I get AI ready? And I'm going to make it really simple for you. Just think about your data in the same way you think about SEO. If it can be organized and it can be clear and it can be tagged properly, and your data can support all the taxonomy that's required and the markup that's required for SEO, AI, you've got a long way to being AI ready. There are some other things, and there are some other tools from an AI perspective, but that's a whole other workshop. So anything that I left out of that description about mastering usability with your data, John?
As I think about the intersection of the customer journey and the operations journey that we talked about earlier, one of the things that I'd like to say is that, when you're mastering data and when you're creating that reference data that is going to be applicable for your customers and your employees, think about how that needs to be purpose built for them. So the data that you need in order to support your customer experience, such as the appropriate description to give them confidence that they actually want to add that item to cart and then check out, also needs to be considered of the data that you're going to need when you're actually going to pick, pack, and ship that item in the warehouse, and the information that an employee is going to need on their screen. All of that data, right, really strings together the usability of this and whether it's purpose-built for the systems that are going to need to consume that, as well as the people that are going to need to interact with it.
And if you tuned into our user experience workshop, you would know what John is talking about, that it's not just about the landing page, the website itself. User experience is that emotion and that entire result that you end up communicating. And boy, can data play an important role, or boy, can it do some damage if it's not thought about properly. Go for it, John. We've got the governance slide up. Your turn.
Yeah. So I picked on this earlier when we said, what's the one that really focuses? Do you have the mechanisms in place for making sure that all of the processes are defined, the people and their roles that they play in working with data, those are clearly understood, and that you've got the ability to trace back the data to where you got it, who updated it, as well as how that information is used in the organization, and ultimately who's accountable for the overall health of the system. So think about it from those standpoints, and then making sure that everything is in place all the way down to your ability to audit the source of truth. And I love how you characterize the chain of custody as that relates to it, Scott, because it's not just about how you actually take the data that you have and enrich it. It's also about where you get it from and the value that ultimately provides your business in order to allow you to have the rights to win in this place.
Well said. And I would also say this criteria is easy to implement. It runs into cultural, real human kind of obstacles, but you can define a process, you can get good, and you can add accountability for following it. And by doing that, you go a long way to accomplishing all the rest of the important criteria that we've been talking about. So let's get that tool back up there, flyw.co/B2B data. You'll be looking at a spreadsheet that is similar to this. Again, we've got an instruction sheet here, so you don't have to rewatch this entire worksheet to give you a quick reminder of what we're talking about doing here. The last tab is the health scorecard, looking at the completeness of the data that's in all of your fields, and then doing a little bit more of a subjective quick measure on consistency, accuracy, usability, and governance. Rewatch if you need a reminder on some of those definitions. John, thanks so much for joining me today. Really hope to have you back for future workshops.
Scott, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you, as well as all the great customers and clients that we have that are viewing this. And so if there's any questions about it, don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us.